Welcome back. It's Beyond the Box Score. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always by co-host Jacob Gibbs. Today we are here to bring you some advanced data and talk a little ball in championship week. We know if you're still here, you're a sicko like us and you love watching football. You're excited for these Christmas Day games. I know I am. That is a debate among Twitter. I don't want football on Christmas. I want it. I want it Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I love the island games. Or you're in your championship week. It's one or the other. I know a lot has fallen off, but if you're here, you got to the championship game, good for you. Enjoy it. We're hoping here we can talk a little ball with you and maybe give you a little bit of insight into what decisions you should make. But before we do all that, I did want to take a little bit of time just to thank everyone who's tuned into this podcast or YouTube show in year one. It will hopefully be a podcast in year two with Jacob and I, because we had an idea, started this from scratch, kind of did things our own way, and have learned a lot along the way. And you guys have made it possible. I at least never want to take for granted the platform that we have here at CBS Sports and Fantasy Football Today and the listener base that it's opened our content up to. And I really enjoy the interactions I've had off the pod, and I know Jacob does as well, or off the show, in our DMs and just on replies on Twitter. I love the community that we're hopefully building, and we have some exciting things planned for the offseason. I'm excited to get into data about these college players and try to give you guys the next Brian Thomas Jr. before the Brian Thomas Jr. breakout. And I think we're going to look at a very fun class coming up, Jacob. The running back class is phenomenal. I cannot wait to talk running backs with you. It's actually my favorite position to scout as well, by the way, going into the draft. I just love watching the nuances of play at the running back position and love trying to parse out the data. So without further ado, let's get into this week's content, Jacob, and let's start this thing with a little bit of RB usage notes from week 16.
Sure. Yeah. We're just going to go position by position and try to give you guys all the goods to make your best decisions this week. We do have a lot of other stuff that we want to talk about. We're going to hopefully have time to do playoff analysis once we get into some more real talking about kind of stuff. But today it's mostly just going to be focused on fantasy. I assume that's why you're here. Otherwise, you're probably just like, I'm taking a couple weeks off, which is totally fair. That's what we're kind of planning to do next week. Okay, so at running back, just going to start with looking at the Bell Cow report per the Great Fantasy Points data, and look at some route rates as well. So start with route rates. Chase Brown, number one, of course. This is the percentage of team dropbacks that a running back is running a route on. Number one in week 16 for Chase Brown. The receiving upside is huge for him in a given week. I wanted to bring up that Jaylen Warren was second, and that last week Jaylen Warren had his highest snap rate of the season and his second highest snap rate ever in a game that Najee Harris also played. I think that the Steelers are just kind of, it feels like moving away from Najee a little bit. Warren has been the more effective back while the two have existed there together. And next up is maybe the best matchup they've had on the ground in a while. That sounds crazy, but I think Chris Jones might miss this game on Wednesday for the Chiefs. And the Chiefs still have a lot of tough run defenders. It's not an easy matchup, but what the Steelers had to face lately has been really, really difficult. So maybe a flex guy you can use. We're going to get to some more running back decisions at the end of the show. The last guy I wanted to bring up, just from a route run standpoint, is Aaron Jones. His route rate was at 60%, which is the highest it's been since week 9. And we'll get into some XFP, expected fantasy points. Look at him through that lens as well. I think he is a really good start this week. I have him, I think, as a top 12, borderline top 12 running back. RB14 is where I have him, which is the highest that he's been in quite some time. There were some fumbling issues. And they were mixing other guys in, mixing Akers in. But last week, 18 and 19 carries for the backfield went to Jones. It was all him. And I think it makes sense. They're right there with the Lions. Like, they could easily get the 1 seed. I don't know, easy, but they could get the 1 seed. And I think they're just like, okay, fumbling's been good. This is the guy. We know this is our most effective running back. Here we go. So yeah, I do feel good about him if you need to trust him in this spot.
I like that call too, because we're getting to that point of the NFL season where teams are like less likely to try and save players for the playoffs or try to kind of like work in different mixes of players. It's like, we need to win right now, the Vikings.
Yeah.
We have a shot at this 1 seed. Let's do everything we can and put our best players on the field for every snap.
Yeah, in the middle of the season, you can experiment more and kind of figure things out. But yeah, I think they've got their sights set on the playoffs and kind of trying to max out every game, be the best they can every game, which obviously you want to do. You're in the NFL. But okay, XFP for week 16. Number one, Jameer Gibbs. No surprise, David Montgomery goes down. That's the roll right away. It
Oh
honestly,
yeah.
he only produced 27. Is that right? 23 fantasy points, which was underwhelming.
Yeah.
Easily could have been 30 plus. His XFP was 27. The next highest at the running back position was Chuba Hubbard with 23. Devon Achane, 21. Alexander Madison was RB4, which is crazy, but he got a ton of targets. This is half PPR scoring. So I don't know on the Raiders. They've got a good matchup. I've got them as like low end. I'm going to show you the range. There's a range after like RB 17 or 16 or something where there's like 15 straight running backs. It's like I don't want to touch any of those guys. You might have to, like you
Yes.
did. Some teams load up on running backs in your league. Maybe you made it without, like some of the top guys. And Derrick Henry didn't have a great week last week. Like maybe you're in with some of these other running backs, and you're just like having to make this decision, and it's brutal. But Madison, had a good XFP, scored 14 points. Abdullah had good XFP, had I think almost 20 points. We'll get to them. Saquon Barkley, RB5, XFP. Kenneth Walker, RB6. So even in a game where the running backs didn't do much, they did kind of abandon the run game. Seattle can produce fantasy points in this backfield, and we've seen that. And if Walker's out, Charbonnet is a priority start. If they're both out, we'll talk about what's his name, Kenny McIntosh. Aaron Jones, RB7 last week. So like I said, the role was better than it's been in quite some time. Chase Brown, RB8. I think Jones is RB15 over the past month. So that is an improvement. Devon Achane over the past month is RB1. That really surprised me, but he has way more targets than anybody else. That's still my pin tweet if you want to go look at just what they're doing with him, like just straight up running downfield routes and winning at the point of the catch. It's like, what is
And that's
this?
what I wanted to get into like first on this show as far as like where I'm at with HN. Because I remember during the preseason, both you and I were extremely high on him. We had him ranked way above, not way above, but above consensus at the running back position with
Yeah.
the idea in mind of like, and I want to really apply this to next year's fantasy, Jacob, when it comes to guys like Brian Thomas Jr. and David and Devon HN, among many others. It's like, go for the gusto. Go to try to win your championship. Take the player with the wider range of outcomes who actually has the upside ceiling to be a difference maker and win you fantasy leagues, which HN might do at this point. He did it last week with that long touchdown run at the end for many rosters, one of mine included, where I literally won the matchup because of that run. And this range of outcomes, by the way, is not even like the ceiling. Like I watched him run that route, Jacob. I think Josh Norris posted, you might have posted it as well, where it literally looks like he's running a receiver on an in-breaker and then kind of rises to the catch point and makes it a contested catch. Just phenomenal stuff from a running back, all of which we kind of profiled as a possibility. But when we talked about his ceiling in the
I didn't know he was
preseason,
going to be doing that.
well, we didn't know he was going to be doing that. But when we talked about his ceiling in the preseason, we had the idea in mind that we'd be getting the Miami Mike McDaniel offense ceiling that we had hit at times in the past. That's not this. This is not the Dolphins offense. So it's interesting to me that he's still kind of paying off that investment despite the offense not reaching anywhere near the peak we thought it could. And it kind of just goes to show what kind of value you can have with these kind of running backs who run a lot of routes, run them really well, almost like wide receivers. You mentioned Chase Brown, super high route percentage. He's obviously one of the best investments in fantasy this season. So it's just something I want to focus on as we head to next year. We're always doing it, Jacob. You and I have prioritized getting running backs who are involved in the passing game, but there are some of these guys like Achane and Brown and others who are really more involved than others, and not just from a target share standpoint, from like where they're being targeted on the field.
Yeah, and definitely where they're being targeted is important. If you can get guys who are getting targeted down the field, that is really unique. But just getting targets in general is crucial for fantasy. It's worth way more than a rush.
Yep.
And to just best illustrate that point, this is last week's XFP. Jonathan Taylor, 17. Javonte Williams, 16.8. They had almost an identical XFP because Javonte had 11 targets.
Yeah.
And then Jonathan Taylor, of course, like he turns 2 runs into like.
And just for those who don't know, XFP is expected fantasy points. I just want to make sure we go over lingo as we roll it out.
Yeah, I said that earlier to be more clear about it. It just like has a point value that's assigned for every touch, every opportunity. Targets are worth more because historically targets have been worth more, and where the targets are coming is that matters as well. So Devon Achane's target is not weighted the same as somebody else's targets because there's air yards. Touches in the red zone are worth more. And so anyway, these guys who had drastically different fantasy days have basically the same XFP, because if you did simulate it a million times and you assume that their talent was the same and the game was the same in terms of where the scoring opportunities were coming, where the targets were coming, Javante's game was basically the same in the aggregate, if you just like boiled it down to that, because targets are worth so much more. In this case, Jonathan Taylor is such a good talent that it doesn't matter. It's like what Derrick Henry's been doing all season long, is what Saquon Barkley's been doing all season long, where I went on this big nerdy spiel at the beginning of the year about his XFP basically is not that good, but you can just crush XFP if you're really good at getting FP, which these guys are. But
If you're just like Jonathan Taylor and Barkley, you can house runs.
But what if you're Devon Achane and you can crush XFP and
You
get
can
all the
house
targets?
run.
Yeah, to your point at the beginning. All right.
You gonna tell them I house Dylan's burger? No.
Say it again, dog. Okay. Anyone else at running back XFP that I want to bring up? Chuba Hubbard is RB7 over the past month. I wanted to bring that up because there was a game or two where they were more pass heavy and he kind of fell off a little bit. It seemed like maybe they're going to ease his load, but he's still the guy. He's still, I think, locked in as a top 12, top 15 type of guy each week. And then the other thing was, yes, Tyrone Tracy. Tyrone Tracy over the past month is running back 17 in XFP, just ahead of Rico Dowdle. And that surprised me because Dowdle had 3 straight games where he was dominant and was just getting tons of touches. But it just comes back to the same point that we were just emphasizing, which is receiving involvement is so important. This is for half PPR, not full PPR.
Right.
Tracy has 19 targets over the past month. Only Jahmyr Gibbs and Achane have more over the past month. So I did want to bring that up because that really surprised me. But then I looked at my rankings and I did have Tracy one spot ahead of Dowdle. And I was like, I think that does make sense, even though it feels sort of fragile with Tracy. Like the offense is so bad that it could really, really bottom out. And like you said last week, it was really contingent on that one amazing touchdown play. But I do think he's talented enough to make big plays. And the receiving does give him a more bankable floor than I do think Dowdle has, which seems crazy because he's been getting 20 touches a game. But we just saw last week that like when the offense gets shut down and the running doesn't work and they have to throw and take to the air, it's like, what does he do? He basically does nothing. And that could definitely happen this week against the Eagles, especially if CeeDee Lamb gets banged up or whatever. It's like this offense, the Dallas, we're going to go over implied point totals from Vegas at the end of the show. Dallas is tied with the Giants for the lowest implied total on the week.
Wow.
Tied with the Giants? Yeah,
That's
I think
unexpected for me.
I think, yeah, I know. I don't know if they're expecting Lamb to play much. But yeah, tied with the Giants. So absolutely, you could start Tracy over him. All right. I know I'm done with running back unless you have anything you wanted to hit on before we move on. We'll get into some start stuff later.
No, I wanted to get into Achane specifically on this one. Let's move to wide receiver usage notes.
All righty. Wide receiver XFP for week 16. XFP leaderboard for just last week. AJ Brown, number 1, of course. Devontae Adams is 2nd. Brian Thomas Jr. 3rd. Malik Neighbors 4. Jackson Smith and Jigba 5. So that is higher than he's been in a long time. He typically has been somebody who's been outperforming his opportunities. But the last couple of weeks, they've been funneling more stuff to him. It's been Metcalf who's been up here in this range. Dude, I heard a really interesting conversation on The Athletic yesterday. And I've got a stat from Ryan Heath as well. Have you listened to yesterday's podcast?
No.
They're basically like, are we approaching a real discussion about DK Metcalf and is it like time to move on? Robert Mays and Derek Clausen were talking about it.
From a Seahawks standpoint?
Yeah, like if you could get a big trade from him and just kind of blow things up a little bit there. I don't know. Like he's been such a frustrating player for a long time. He makes such amazing plays, but at the same time, like he just doesn't do the things you want him to do, especially like at the catch point, and like trying to run the offense through him just feels like it gets so disjointed so fast because he's not reliable, and they get into so many like 2nd and 3rd and long situations, and it's just like, especially if the offensive line can't protect, like
right.
I don't trust him to win quickly with timing and stuff like that. He's going to be a really, really interesting player to see like what his career arc ends up looking like. All right, back on track with the wide receivers. Jackson Smith and Jigba was wide receiver 5 last week in XFP, followed by Xavier Worthy, wide receiver 6. I'm really, really intrigued by him this week. I don't want to have people be like irresponsible and pushing him ahead of good quality starts they feel good about, but the volume is good. It has been there, and it's been like simple, short stuff where it's
Right.
like I feel like his floor should be high, but I just don't. You just don't have that trust level with him yet. He's still so young, and he's had lots of games where it's just been like nothing basically. But we're late in the season. The narrative from the whole team and everything is people inside, like Matt Nagy for the Chiefs, like people inside the organization are saying now, not just announcers talking about it on TV, that like he's reminding us so much of Rashee Rice, how he's coming into his own and
Sure.
developing and becoming familiar with everything as the season goes on. That just surprised me to hear that comparison from Nagy, because like what Rashee Rice did at the end of the year was insane. Like he was a really dominant player and really, really important for the offense, which I don't feel that way about Worthy, but
It's not the
it's not a
same.
one. It's not a one for one
Yeah.
comparison. Yeah,
But I will say this about Worthy, which is interesting to me, and I really like the call. And he's somebody I would want in my lineups in the fantasy championship. What I like the most about that is one, we know, like we have proof years of this, that this Chiefs offense is difficult to pick up for this wide receiver position.
yeah,
And so it does seem to make sense that as he gets more reps, he's playing faster and he's able to get to the spots Mahomes is expecting him to get to. In addition to building that rapport out with Mahomes, which obviously isn't where we want it to be on the deep half yet, but it's getting better underneath. And it's just the way that offense is designed, it makes sense that there would be more value to Worthy in a player like Worthy if he can get better on track with the underneath stuff, just how that offense works. That's one. Two, I do feel like he's giving you that floor now. And by the way, three is just like watch his tape at Texas. He was not just a John Ross. He was somebody who was winning on that intermediate level and short and tough catches in traffic. Like he was an interesting player, even just around the line of scrimmage, the ways that Rashee Rice was used last year in the screen game. So we haven't seen a lot of with Worthy. Most of it has just been like those quick hitches. Mahomes just hits him and he doesn't really go for anything because he's like isolated against a corner and not much space. But like all those ways tell me that like if you have that floor, there's still also, Jacob, to me at least, the possible ceiling of like Mahomes could hit him on a big play. Like it's not impossible. I know it hasn't looked good this year. Mahomes specifically hasn't looked great targeting deep, but I still feel like there's something in that bag for them too. So I think when you have that, now that he's created that floor for himself with just more usage underneath it, with the addition of the over the top stuff, I like him as a play in fantasy for the championship games.
yeah. I feel like on paper he's one of the best plays at the position,
Yeah.
because like I do think he's got a pretty built-in floor, and if he does connect on one of those or even freaking two of those against the Steelers last week, this is per Scott Barrett, the two single highest average separation scores of the wide
Mm.
receiver position last week both came from the Ravens going
Wow.
against the Steelers. And I think that's relevant, like it's Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, they're good, maybe even better. I think that's fair to say they're better separated than Worthy at this point. But like if Joey Porter's out, like I definitely think he could get loose for something down the field.
We have to always keep in mind, we repeat this every show, but it's so important. What the defenses were throughout the year means nothing. It's what are they now with the war of attrition? And the Steelers defense is not looking the way it looked earlier this season.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, just to finish up real quick, Week 16's XFP at wide receiver, Worthy was 6, Nico Collins, wide receiver 7, T. Higgins, wide receiver 8, DJ Moore, wide receiver 9. This really surprised me.
That's
And yeah, I think it's a good segue to like the past month, because I've got a few guys wanted to hit on there. Real quick before that, Debo Samuel was wide receiver 11. I doubt that you have Debo if you're in the championship, but maybe he had a good game
right.
last week. I don't know. If there is a situation where you needed to get, we finally got one game of like not complete, just despair signals. Like one game where it's like, oh, maybe they can do something with here. But yeah, it's the 49ers. Okay, so DJ Moore, let's talk about an even more hopeless situation here. Hopefully not. Come on. I want Caleb to be good, man. DJ Moore over the past month is the wide receiver 5 in XFP, and the only receivers with a higher first read target share are AJ Brown and Puka Nakua. This past game, the reason his XFP was up is because his air yards were actually there. The other games, it's just been really, really short stuff. But this is half PPR. It's not full PPR. I would assume he's basically wide receiver 1 in full PPR, just because the target volume has been so high. But again, it is a bunch of short stuff. If you look at his actual finishes in fantasy over that time, wide receiver 7, but then wide receiver 37, 29, and 30. So like there's a reason that this doesn't sound right, and it's because he's not been producing. But the math suggests that over a larger sample size, it would probably be resulting in a lot more. Whatever you think in terms of your trust level with Caleb and everything. I thought it looked like he played better last week from what I saw. Their implied total is 20. Their implied point total per Vegas is 20, which is not just complete hopeless despair like some of these other offenses. I don't know. I don't want to go there, but I did want to point it out because like he's getting a ton of targets every single week.
It's something to think about when it's like one of those guys that ends up being the surprise guy in your championship game that blows up. And it's like, why did this guy have DJ Moore lineup? You're looking at his bench, you're like, wow, he had no other options. It's like maybe we can look at the expected fantasy point angle and just the target share. Be like, okay, this could be. I mean, DJ Moore. We always talked about how bad his quarterback play was throughout his career, like in off-season discussions of where to value him in your drafts. It's like, well, he's finally getting the best quarterback play of his life. And it's like, well, actually, somehow he's not.
To me, it's like, I don't know if you're looking at DJ Moore and Cooper Kupp, they're kind of the same, and I feel like he probably has more explosive yak ability than Kupp.
And probably better chance for game script you want, right? Like the Rams game script these days is so run heavy.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. Like the Bears are definitely more likely to put up like 40 pass attempts right now.
Especially their defense playing poorly now. Yeah.
I mean, that's why Moore's been getting all these targets.
Yep.
I've got him a wide receiver 27. I send out my rankings every Tuesday. It won't be this Thursday. Typically it is. And every Sunday. So definitely subscribe to the newsletter for that if you want updates on this, because this is a tough range, and I'll continue to dig into the matchups to try to figure.
One little note on that. I want to make this clear again. We are working on fixing anyone who has tried to sign up via their email through for the newsletter. There are reasons why I think that we're trying to starting to unpack as far as why you're not getting it. But please, if you are somebody who has tried to sign up for Jacob's free, by the way, an unbelievably detailed and actionable newsletter. These are probably adjectives you'd expect me to say about a friend and a coworker, but they're actually the truth. So you'll read it once, you'll know what I'm talking about. But if you are one of those people and you're not getting it in your email, do me two favors. One, try to, as crazy and simple as this sounds, please try to sign up again with the same email, go through that same link. Weirdly, sometimes it works on the second time. I've had a lot of examples of that. But if that doesn't work, send me your email via DM on Twitter. Find me on Twitter and DM me your email and say, I'm trying to sign up for the newsletter. We're working kind of backwards to fix this issue.
Yep, we'll do what we can. We'll get it fixed. That's another thing we're excited for this offseason. There's a lot of newsletter content, a lot of deep research pieces, and all that will be cool. So yeah, I've got DJ Moore at wide receiver 27, which is basically in line with his last few finishes. Is much lower than his XFP. There's upside for more than that for sure. I've got him ahead of Garrett Wilson, who's also been frustrating and doesn't have as high of an XFP number. And the Jets are implied for only 18 points this week, which is really, really low. But I think it makes sense. The Bills' defense is pretty good. Okay. So at wide receiver 16 and wide receiver 17 over the past month in XFP, we've got Xavier Worthy and DeAndre Hopkins. That's been trending in opposite directions lately, more recently, like over the past 3 weeks. Worthy is wide receiver 13. Hopkins is wide receiver 24. I wouldn't want to trust Hopkins, but I do still think that there's an opportunity for him to score a touchdown at a given point. And that the point I brought up about the Steelers cornerbacks, applies to him as well. But I do think with Marquise Brown back, they want to get him in a groove, so they're going to continue to scheme things to him. And then Worthy has just been a really big part of the offense. So I think Hopkins could just kind of get left by the wayside. Marvin Harrison Jr. over the past month is wide receiver 11 in XFP, which I guess I'm just bringing up to let you guys suffer with me. I don't know. It's just like insane to me how bad it's been in Arizona. Like I didn't have very high expectations for Kyler, but I still thought that this could work, and it hasn't. Like I guess it's just MHJ and Kyler who are really not getting it done for fantasy. And honestly, Kyler wasn't that bad this past week, but he hasn't run like that most of the year. And then McBride just killed people last week. I don't know. I'm just so frustrated by that. When I saw him at wide receiver 11, I just couldn't believe it. It's like Tyreek Hill, Puka Nacua, T. Higgins, Marvin Harrison Jr. What are we talking about? Okay.
Yeah. It's frustrating. I mean, I've talked at length about that situation, I feel like, on our pods. I don't know if it's a solution that is in sight with this offensive system and with Kyler Murray at quarterback, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't feel good about it. A couple other guys I wanted to mention. Jordan Addison, wide receiver 19 over the past month. It's swung back more towards Justin Jefferson, but Addison is still getting good usage. Jason, wide receiver 21 over the past month. I think that's about where I'm at with him, even though he's been higher lately. I think this week I've got him, wide receiver 15. So like that's the same range as like T. Higgins and Lad McConkey. I still don't know. I still just don't really necessarily trust the offense. But it was good to see him. Like he had over 150 air yards in this past week, and that was the third game this year that he's had that. He didn't have that once all year. His second highest air yardage game last year was 73 air yards. So he's getting more involved as the first read guy, and it's not just short stuff. He's getting stuff down the field as well. I think there's upside for him, but I don't know. I just continue to be terrified that the floor is going to fall out just because I don't really trust the offense and the play calling. Ridley was the last guy I wanted to bring up. It seemed like you were kind of down on him, which I do think makes sense, but I had a tweet from Ryan Heath that I wanted to highlight. So over the past month, he's wide receiver 25 in XFP, which is good, but goes to show that like a lot of these stats, you'll see him near the top at in terms of targets and air yards and stuff like that. When you actually like contextualize it with like how catchable those opportunities were, he drops from that like top 10 range to more like low end wide receiver 2 kind of range. So I thought wide receiver 25 was a good illustration of that. But this is from Ryan. Ridley is averaging 93 catchable air yards per game in Mason Rudolph starts. So that is really good. That would be like first over the course of full season. It's way too small sample size to extrapolate it. But do you have any Rudolph thoughts? I don't think we've talked about him once.
Not many. I will say this. I have more faith in a player like Ridley or Chig or anyone in that passing game with Mason Rudolph in over Will Levis. And why do I say that? You look at the two quarterbacks, and on paper, it seems like Levis will be better for any passing game. But again, we need quarterbacks who can keep offenses on time, in rhythm, throw with anticipation. This is something Will Levis just cannot do to any degree, in addition to his ball placement and accuracy issues, which go really aside from it. I think his biggest issue is just not seeing it and not anticipating it. Forget the accuracy issues that come along with it. And so Rudolph is kind of a little bit better at that. I mean, a lot better, I guess, than a Will Levis type. Not much better than most players. It's kind of like the Drew Lock, Tim Boyle argument among Giants fans. Tim Boyle just gets the ball out fast with anticipation. He has no other talent, but like it still somehow makes the offense work better and gives us a Malik Neighbors end zone target that he turns to a touchdown for the first one since week 3. So it's similar in that regard, I think, for Calvin Ridley. I think he will definitely fare better with Rudolph over Levis. Still not someone I'd love to have in my lineups, though.
Yeah, I love that comparison. All right, so I just want to wrap up wide receiver by giving an actual list. So this is over the past month. XFP, Malik Neighbors, number 1. We'll see if that converts. It's hit or miss, but that's where he's at in terms of the opportunity. Brian Thomas Jr., number 2, which is so fun. Like that we're at this point in the season. He's locked in. Like again, consensus rankings have him outside of the top 10 this week. And it's like, what on earth does he have to do? Like, I don't see how he's like not. There's only like a handful of guys I would ever want over him. Like, I guess Puka and Nico and Justin Jefferson.
Let's think who we'd want. Yeah, because I was going to say, I was hoping you would mention Jefferson.
I literally have him at 6 behind Jamar Chase, Nico, Jefferson, Mike Evans, and Puka Nacua.
You can even make the case you'd rather have him than Evans at this point.
Sure, yeah.
I saw a stat today from Scott Barrett that was comparing Brian Thomas's targets and everything, his opportunities with Mac Jones versus Trevor Lawrence. And it's like eerie, the numbers. I think he's actually slightly has a better chance of producing with Mac Jones.
They've totally changed his role since Mac Jones has taken over. It's like, just designing a bunch of short stuff to him. But yeah, that's where he's at right now. The formula is good, and he is really good in terms of.
Why change it if you're the Jaguars right now? You're going to ride this out. Yeah.
Yeah. Jamar Chase, 3, wide receiver 3 over the past month. Devontae Adams, 4, DJ Moore, 5, Tyreek Hill, 6, Puka Nacua, 7, T. Higgins, 8, Justin Jefferson, 9, AJ Brown, 10, Marvin Harrison, 11, Garrett Wilson, 12. That surprised me. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb. So even with the huge games and all the targets, that's where CeeDee Lamb falls because it's just so many short targets. That's pretty much it. I think we hit on everything at receiver. You ready to move on to tight end?
Yeah, let's do some tight end stuff.
All right, this one should be pretty quick. So going to start with route rate. Again, this is the percentage of the team's dropbacks that a tight end ran a route on. And again, this is all per fantasy points data. If you go to their weekly reports, this is one of them. You can look and see each player's route rate each week. And so you can kind of compare how the course of the season is influenced, that whether the trajectory is like following something steady or just random. And you can also see like, wow, this is the highest that it's ever been. It's got it all color coded. Brock Bowers, number one, no surprise. The guys I really wanted to bring up are Chigakonkwo at 81%. So Bowers is 95%. The next highest is Trey McBride at 88%. Chig is at fourth at 81%. The week before, Okonkwo's rate was 53% when he had a huge game. It's never been above 80% all year, and it's only been above 70% one other time. So this is a serious change if it sticks. I don't know if it will, but it would be a pretty random like blip on the radar to just go from 53 to 81 for one game. And he's really been a productive per route player in the past. And his data looks way, way better with Rudolph under center compared to Will Levis, where these are all pretty small sample sizes. So I don't know, we're talking about a one game here, a few games without Levis. Take it for what it's worth. It's Chio Okonkwo, it's the Tennessee Titans. But in terms of XFP, he looks really good. And he's been a player who's been able to convert pretty efficiently in the past. TJ Hawkinson, I wanted to bring up, only tight end 16 on the week in route rate at 68%. It's been in the 70s a few times, but he's been back now since week 9. So he's played over 2 months and hasn't been really like skilled up to a full-time player. It's close, but it's just like when I went to do rankings this week, I saw consensus had him at tight end 6. He was like one of the players I was the furthest behind on. And I don't know. After looking into it, I think that's just a name value thing because none of the underlying stuff really sticks out for Hawkinson. So I just wanted to bring that up. Like if Chig feels better to you, like I think you can make that case. It's ultimately up to your risk tolerance. Okay, so over the past month, XFP and Njoku at 1. We talked about it on Monday's show. With DTR, he is going to get short yardage targets probably, but the offense also could just fall apart at any point. So this number doesn't really mean anything. To me, Okonkwo is a better start. We brought up some of these guys, and I thought it was a good discussion. I wanted to get back to it. Adam brought up Hunter Henry over Njoku, and I think that's totally justifiable, actually. He's tight end 9 in XFP. Over the past month, he was tight end 3 in week 16. He's averaging 9 half PPR points over the past month. He occasionally, Hunter Henry, has been able to pop for 70 or more yards or a touchdown because Drake May is good and gives some life to the offense. And Hunter Henry's a big guy, and Drake May is willing to hit him over the middle on some of those, So I do feel like I could see justifying him over Njoku. I feel like there's more potential for him to have one of those games, whereas it would really be a surprise if Njoku got to that kind of a game. If you just want to bet on who's more likely to get 8 or 9 or 10, I think it's Njoku. I think if you simulate it 1,000 times, maybe 600 of them he hits that. But there's also going to be a lot of those games, maybe 100 or 150, where he gets 3, which Henry could do, but I don't know, just being in that Cleveland offense gives so much really drastic downside.
How I feel about that Dorian Thompson Robinson offense. I just have I'll start Ford if I have to, and maybe Njoku if I'm in a tough spot. But I am with you. I'm looking for alternative options. I don't want to be a part of a 120-yard passing experience.
The other guy that Adam brought up was Dalton Schultz, which I don't necessarily know if Tank Dell will affect him that much.
Shouldn't, yeah.
The way they get the targets is way different, but it is just, fewer schemed options. So maybe they scheme different things. But yeah, Schultz versus Baltimore, I feel like him or Tucker Kraft against Minnesota, they have the ability to pop randomly and get 2 touchdowns or something just because it's a potential shootout. Whereas again, with Njoku, I don't know if you get that. And I think their floors are pretty similar to Njoku's. So if you wanted to do that, if you want to just roll the dice and try to get real lucky, I don't know. I think it's kind of a pipe dream for Njoku to give you a huge game, which maybe is stupid to
Great.
say because he's so good. And, like he could get yards after the catch and have a huge play at any given point. Yeah.
But not a lot of red zone opportunities, not a lot of touchdown opportunities.
Yeah. Okay, tight end. Let's get back to this real quick. Over the past month, Njoku 1, Trey McBride 2 in XFP, Brock Bowers 3, Dalton Kincaid 4 in XFP per game. This is only 2 games, but I did want to highlight it. Dalton Kincaid, they really tried to get going this week. He only ran around on half the dropbacks, but they did design a lot of stuff to him. I watched his targets. He had 3 downfield looks and 4 short looks. The downfield looks looked like there was literally no chance for them to be completed. I don't want to be too critical because he's missed time and he's still a year 2 guy. But like, man, when I watch him, he just doesn't look like. I don't see how he has the skill set to get open downfield consistently. Maybe he's somebody who can get lost in
I haven't watched a lot of his
a good
tape.
offense where there's a lot of things to worry about. But he doesn't look like a very it looks predictable what he's doing. He doesn't look like a very dynamic route runner. It's just like, I don't know. It looks easy to cover and he's always covered. I don't really know how it works. But we'll see. It's still early. And some of his per route data this season is encouraging, but it's all through target volume. Like it starts with that. He's like 3rd in targets per route run. And then as you look at all the other stuff, it falls off slightly. And it's like, because he's not producing efficiently relative to his opportunities, really, like, I don't know. I thought it was wild to see him here, but it's like that lines up with what I've been seeing is that they're really trying to get him the ball. But I mean, he was the only player with multiple first read targets last week. It was like a bunch of running, and then they tried to get him going, and nothing happened. He had like 15 yards. Travis Kelce, tight end 5, XFP over the past month. Sam Laporta 6.
How? How
is that about who? Kelce?
Yeah. I watch the Chiefs games and I see no opportunity.
Well, I think that this just tells you where we're at with tight end.
Yeah.
Like any given player.
I'll tell you one thing I'm doing, Jacob. This is a 30,000 foot view thought, and I've been thinking about this for weeks on weeks of doing fantasy content. I'm officially going to no matter how it looks, because every year I buy in the tight end, I will not be burning any of my mid-round capital at the tight end position next year, and I mostly play in auctions. I will not be spending that $15 I spent on Kincaid this year. And yeah, I hit on McBride one, but like I also Kincaided it, and I also pitzed it, and I also like did all these investments that I'd rather spend on James Conner in that range, right? Or like even go down a little bit. Chase Brown. There's just so many better bets to make, I think.
Godspeed. I wish I had an answer for you, tight end. I don't know.
Sure. I'm just done with
it. That's fair. Yeah, no, I think Kelce and Laporta being in this range really speaks to where we're at with tight end. And I do think that's an important note for somebody like Okonkwo is that like over any given 4-game stretch at tight end, there's going to be games where your XFP is like nothing, like 2 or 4 or something. If you're not one of these guys like Kelce, who has a built-in role, even the weeks where he gets like a little bit forgotten in the offense, he still has like 4 or 5 targets, maybe an end zone target or something. That's not where we're at with most of these guys. Okonkwo is next, tight end 7 in XFP over the past month. Then Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, Dalton Schultz surprised me a little bit. He's only played 3 games. The only other guys I wanted to bring up was Hawkinson. We already hit on him. I think we're good. Yeah, I think we're good to move on and look ahead to these Week 17 games.
Yeah, let's take a look at some Week 17 games with some implied point totals, just to give you an idea of what we're expecting from a fantasy standpoint, where there could be blow-up spots, players you can maybe get in. We'll start with this Tampa Bay game with an implied total of 29 points against Carolina, the highest on the slate. Rightfully so, I think, if you've watched this Carolina defense these last few weeks, this entire season. Jalen McMillan, I'm excited to hear your thoughts on. Where do you want to start with this Tampa offense?
Yeah, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time getting into detailed discussions about each of these teams and points. I just wanted to mostly bring them up and then get into rankings discussions.
Okay.
We'll definitely talk about McMillan. But yeah, Tampa Bay, I did want to highlight it because it's like Mike Evans, I have got top 5 for that reason. Bucky Irving, I think you pretty much have to have in your lineup for that reason. Baker Mayfield, same thing as Bucky, basically. Like, there are other guys you could talk yourselves into because they have better roles or whatever, but like 29 points is massive. The over-under is 49.5 points. I think that Bryce Young's playing really well. He's had basically 4 out of his past 5 games have been really good. And so like I do think that this has as much shootout potential as any game that's going to happen this week. And McMillan is probably the toughest starts at decision. So we'll get into him when we talk about some more receivers.
Sure.
The other ones were the Rams. We talked about on Monday's show. We figured that would probably be like a low scoring game where both teams kind of try to establish the run. Looks like James Conner might miss this game. So maybe Arizona, especially with Arizona projected to be huge dogs in this one, almost 7-point underdogs. They might end up throwing a lot. And so it might end up being more of a high scoring game than expected if Kyler is able to facilitate it. If not, I do think it'll be kind of what we originally thought, which is a lot of running. But the Rams have the 3rd highest implied total. That really surprised me. I think it's like hope, I guess, for like Cup if you need to. But I, like you and I have said, I think it might just be a ton of running.
Running and Puka.
Puka, yeah, I do pretty much always feel good about him. You're not benching him. I like it worries me a little bit.
Put out there this week with Puka. Historically speaking, I
Exactly.
feel like I'm going to be incredibly high on him in drafts next year.
Yeah. The Commanders, 4.5-point favorites against the Falcons. Excited to see this one. 47.5-point over under is one of the highest of the week. I feel good about going back to Brian Robinson, even though it was a really disappointing game. I feel good about pretty much all of the Commanders, even like Zach Ertz if you have to. I think that this could be a really interesting game where it gets back and forth. It'll probably depend on Penix, but I'm pretty bullish on him. The Chiefs I wanted to bring up, we talked about them as well on Monday's show. It looks like Chris Jones is probably not going to play, and George Pickens is going to play. They took him off the injury report, and so that really changes things. The Chiefs are only implied for 23 points and are only 2.5-point favorites, which really surprised me. So this game like could have some life, but the over/under is low. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that as
I'm
you've thought
with
about it
you.
a
I
bit more
think
with
this
picking
game
it back?
has life. Like, I
Yeah,
really do believe that they're wrong on this for 2 reasons. One being the impact of Chris Jones, the best or second best, depending on how you look at it, defensive tackle, defensive player in the NFL. I believe interior defensive linemen are the most impactful in the NFL. It's my personal opinion from watching the sport. So I would say that. And Pickens, he changes the entire Steelers offense in so many ways. It's crazy, but it really has looked that way from the tape I've seen in some of the breakdowns. And then flip side is you get Mahomes going in a game where he has to score more. Now, I will say this. I feel like the Chiefs offenses look better. We talked about this on yesterday's episode in recent weeks. It's still not very explosive, but I feel like it's looked better. I love that one look where they had the trips to the left with those 3 receivers out there, Worthy, Brown, Hopkins. Like that's what they need for the playoffs. So I'll be excited to see how this game plays out. I think it does have sneaky potential to beat the implied total for sure.
yeah. Pickens crushes press coverage, and the Chiefs use press coverage like 95% of the time.
That was why I loved Dell last week. Tank Dell. He was one of my favorite plays on the slate, and I think it could be similar for Pickens.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how this game goes. And I don't know, it's a Wednesday. Like I could see Pickens coming in fresh and just having a
Yeah.
huge game.
I always get scared this time of year of these cold weather games. I'm going to be honest, from an
Yeah.
offensive standpoint. So I'm just hoping we get a decent weather outlook on it. But yeah, other than that, I like it.
The only other thing was the Cowboys, but we already hit on
Yeah.
the Cowboys and the Jets. The Cowboys are tied 16-point implied total. Jets are only 18. So like the only other teams down there are the Browns and the Saints against the Raiders. So I don't know if you've got to trust Rico Dowdle or CeeDee Lamb or Garrett Wilson. I don't think I would really want to use anybody from this game except Devontae Adams, and even him, I don't love it, but like they have been really, really focusing the offense around him lately. All right, let's do some rankings discussions and wrap this up. Pretty good timing today.
All right, let's start with your boy, Jacob. I saw some heat that you and I took. Apparently last week we were too high on Bucky Irving.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
It was on Twitter. One person, I consider that heat. But this week, he's got the Panthers. I mean, how much better does it get than having the Panthers at home? Would you play him? How high are you on him this week? Would you play him over? We'll do this, and I'll give you my answer, and you'll give me yours. So play him or not, Josh Jacobs.
I've got him one spot above Jacobs. Minnesota on the road. Minnesota's so tough to run on. And just, I mean, it's implied totals. 29 for Tampa. Where's Green Bay? 23.5. I really think you push him as high as you want.
It's like it's an idea of like, okay, so I look at Jacobs, and the Packers essentially didn't need to play him this past game last night, so they didn't basically in the second half. So the flip side of that is Minnesota. They're going to probably need to play him all game, but that defense is phenomenal. Now Bucky, Rashad White has really carved out a better role for himself in the second half, and I don't think that's going away. But it could just be one of those feast games for them, honestly, on the ground. So while the volume I think will be better with Jacobs, I think I would have Irving ahead of him as well.
Yeah, he had 185 scrimmage yards the last time that he played Carolina.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was during a period where they weren't playing. Was White injured, though, or something that I vaguely remember, but maybe not?
I don't think so.
Okay. White was okay.
Maybe White was like just a little bit banged up. It was like the start of the takeover for Bucky.
Okay.
The Giants game was the one before that.
Yes. Okay. How about over James Cook?
Yeah, James Cook is playing really well right now, and it's another spot where they could ride him. The Jets have been really bad at attacking running backs. There's a ton of really strong starts at running back this week, but that's why I did want to bring Bucky up. It's like I think he's right there with any of them. I would start him over Cook. I would start him over Chuba Hubbard. Brought up Charbonnet earlier. I would start him over him. Yeah.
I would play Cook, I think, over Bucky. I really like Cook this week, especially against this Jets defense. It's just not as good as it was supposed to be on the ground. Really a lot of force, a lot of missed tackles on that defense. Okay, now let's get to another player you brought up earlier. It seems like a guy that we like a lot this week as we move forward. Aaron Jones. Is he potentially a league winner that we just weren't expecting? So I'm going to give you a couple here and hear what you say, a few here. Aaron Jones against Green Bay, or Chuba Hubbard against this Bucs defense that disappointed me, to be quite honest, against the Cowboys, and I lost a lot of money betting the Bucs that night.
Yeah, man, that was definitely a letdown for them, and they might not make the playoffs because of it.
Yep.
I do have Chuba ahead of him, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, 12, and I've got Aaron Jones at RB 14. But I mean, Carolina's implied total is only 20.5. They're big underdogs. They could get down and not run that much. I think if you want to push Jones ahead of him, or even some of the guys we were just talking about, the Vikings are implied for 25 points this week, which is more than Jonathan Taylor's implied total. That's more than the Packers. That's a really strong total. It's an important game. It's a revenge game if you're into that for Aaron Jones against Green Bay. A lot on the line for the playoffs. I think he's a great start. You could definitely push him ahead of Cook, ahead of Chuba if you want to.
What about guys like Breece Hall, Joe Mixon?
I would have him above both those guys. Yeah.
I think I would too.
There's a pretty big drop off after those guys. I've got Breece Hall at RB 15, Jones is at 14, Joe Mixon's at 16, and then like Brian Robinson, Jerome Ford, Tyrone Tracy are my next guys, and it starts to get thin really quickly.
And let's get into that actually now. Let's wrap up with getting into that, or let's wrap up running backs with getting into that thinner landscape of guys. Tyrone Tracy, Rico Dowdle, Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears. You get to the Tennessee backs, Rashad White, who I've talked a little bit about, Ramondre Stevenson, even guys like Gus Edwards and DeAndre Swift you start to get into there. Oh, man, I see Pacheco all the way down, which is disappointing to me just because I might start him in one league, which I'm so disappointed about due to a horrific slew of injuries and poor free agent budget management by myself. But where are you at with those guys?
Yeah, you just listed them in order. The guy who I have high relative consensus is Audric Estime for the Broncos against the Bengals.
Where's that coming from?
I thought that I didn't watch a whole lot of him at Notre Dame, but man, I've loved watching him in the NFL, and it feels like things just continue to swing his way. I think I need to revisit it after remembering how many freaking targets Javonte got last week and looking at the playing time. Nothing really changed that drastically. It was just the feel for the game. Did you watch the Thursday night game?
I did watch it, and he did look great. And I will say this. Before the draft, I had Audric Estime as the best value pick by any running back in the entire draft. I didn't know where he would go. I assumed he'd be a day 3 guy just based on his profile, but his Notre Dame tape was phenomenal. I want you to go back and watch some of that this offseason.
That's what I've heard, and I feel like it's just a natural progression that's happened where he's kind of coming into his own and the team is feeling it, and it's just like, I think this is clearly the run game has not been working, and it's like, if this is clearly the thing you haven't really tried is like letting him like take on a big role there. and they kind of have started to do it lately. And there's moments where it feels like they're leaning into it a little bit, and it wouldn't surprise me if this is another step in that progression. It's a rookie, he's a bit of an unheralded rookie, but this is what happens often with rookies.
Right.
Is later in the year they step into a larger role. I think that could happen with him for sure here, and it's a good spot against Cincinnati. It's a game where they could end up just kind of controlling the game on the ground and just bowling the Bengals a little bit, and that wouldn't surprise anybody. And I think that would be through estimate. So if you're looking at other guys in this range, they all feel like they could realistically have 5 or something points, and it's like, well, then I think I would rather just swing on him. I don't know who else here is giving you that much upside. Like Gus Edwards, I have one spot ahead of him because he could fall in the end zone twice.
Yeah, twice again.
Basically, you remember the Tank Bigsby game against the Patriots? Like, it could be that kind of game
Yeah.
where they just do that because Herbert is not quite healthy and they just like want to sim through this game, kind of. I don't know. Like, it's a bunch of really ugly names. We brought up the Raiders backs. I've got them at RB 31 and 32, just behind Pacheco, just ahead of Kareem Hunt, ahead of Tank Bigsby, ahead of Najee Harris. I am apparently a little bit high on those guys relative to consensus, but they both had big weeks. They both had good usage. Both backs are getting involved. Madison is more of the early downs guy and is playing a little bit more, but Abdullah still played. And it's a pretty easy matchup. Like, I don't know. Is there anybody here? I'm curious if there's anybody here that stands out to you. I think I need to move Javonte up a little bit for PPR leagues for sure. But is anybody else that you would roll with from this range? I appear to have lost Stan. I'm not sure. It's possible that I'm lost, but I guess I'll just, yeah, it looks like we've lost Stan. It's just me. All right, we're going to wide receiver next. And I assume Dan will probably be back. The wide receiver, this guy or this guy questions that I had were about Malik Neighbors, Xavier Worthy, and Jalen McMillan. I think I want to hear Dan's thoughts on McMillan the most. And so I'm going to start with Neighbors and see if you can get back for McMillan. On Neighbors, I'm looking at him or like CeeDee Lamb, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Lad McConkey, Cortland Sutton. I think those are kind of guys. You could throw Drake London into that tier. You could even throw Jordan Addison into that group. I think he's played really well. I think those are the kind of the guys that people are going to be deciding between. I figured if you're in the playoffs, there's a good chance that you've got really strong position groups, like you might be making these types of decisions. That's kind of where I'm at. If I'm in the playoffs, it's like I've got to, make a tough call on somebody like Addison or Jackson Smith-Njigba. And to me, with Neighbors, this is where he falls. I ended up being a little bit higher than consensus on him. I've got him wide receiver 12. So he's above everybody from that group except for Cortland Sutton. I'm a little bit higher than consensus on both of those guys. Sutton, the big games haven't really been there as much lately, but I do like the spot against Cincinnati a lot. What's up, Dan?
I'm back.
Hey.
That was the weirdest thing that ever happened before in the history of this podcast or any other. My computer just randomly crashed. I've never had this crash before and just turned off. That was wild.
No worries.
I like it.
I'm talking about Malik Neighbors.
I'm blaming it on too much Premiere, too much Adobe Premiere. I never used to use it. Now I'm cutting up all this tape, and I think I just have too many things saved on this computer. But I apologize to everybody. Let me recenter this bad boy.
It's all good, dude. Talking about Malik Neighbors. Cortland Sutton is the only guy that I have from this group higher than him. And I think that makes sense, but I am a little bit higher on both of those guys than consensus. Jackson Smith-Njigba and CeeDee Lamb, I'm lower on the consensus. I'm actually way lower on Lamb. So I'm curious what you think about Lamb against Philadelphia. I know you've watched their defense in preparation for the podcast. If he's healthy, do you think you would go with him over Malik Neighbors or any of these other guys like Jackson Smith-Njigba or McConkey?
I think just from what you've broken down with both JSN and McConkey, I would have those two over Lamb in this spot. As far as versus Neighbors goes, God, that's tricky. I think I would play Lamb over Neighbors. I think we could be looking at a really bad Neighbors game. I don't know who's going to play quarterback. I just think the Colts are going to control the ball on the offensive side of the ball by running it. Just a really short game with very few possessions for the Giants offense.
Yeah, that's a good call. I'm probably going to move Neighbors down. That's a good call. Like they could have it could be one of those games where they have like 40 plays.
I think they might shut down Neighbors too. He's on the injury report. And it's that time of year where you really, if you're the Giants, you should just be shutting them all down.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, he's probably riskier. I have not had any idea what to do with that guy at the end of the year here. Like
Tough.
1 week I had him like wide receiver 33. He's like, I don't know. I feel no trust at all. And then he's played better lately. He's actually gotten some looks. All right. What about Xavier Worthy? We've talked about him a lot. What do you think about him compared to Jordan Addison, Calvin Ridley, George Pickens?
I'd probably rank that Pickens first. I still love my George Pickens. Worthy, Addison, Ridley for me.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, I've got Pickens lower than him. I actually have him the lowest of this group. They're all right back to back with Jameson Williams thrown in there as well. But I think if you want a safer play, then I would go with these other guys over him. Ridley's not safer, but like I do worry that Pickens, we have got no idea how much he'll play. And it's not an easy spot against the Chiefs necessarily. Like it's always a volatile, equation with Pickens because he's getting such downfield looks. But yeah, if you want upside, I think he has more upside than all of these guys, and like one of the highest upside propositions of anyone at receiver this week. I'll probably end up moving him up ahead of Ridley. I do think I would go with Worthy over him in almost any situation, unless I like just needed pure upside. But even that, I do think there's a lot for him. Okay, last guy. Let's end on Jalen McMillan.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got some really interesting names here that I do think you could justify putting McMillan over, and they are Devontae Smith, DK Metcalf, Marvin Harrison Jr., Josh Downs.
Wow.
And I want to talk with some of the other guys too. How would you order that tier?
So let's start with my easy last, Josh Downs. Anthony Richardson had 11 attempts last week.
Yeah.
I see that being
I love Downs.
pretty similar this week
Yeah.
against the Giants. Maybe even 9 attempts. I don't really know why they need to pass in this game. The Colts, the Falcons surely didn't much in the second half against the Giants. So that would be last for me. I think I would go McMillan first on this list, as crazy as it sounds. We don't know if Jalen Hurts is even going to play. I'm not trusting a Kenny Pickett offense by any means. I think I go McMillan, MHJ, based on some of the usage numbers. Not excited there. Metcalf, Devontae Downs for me.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We'll see on Devontae and Jalen Hurts, obviously. Downs, they did only throw 11 times, but he got 4 targets. He got 36% of the targets. And so if it scales up to even just 20, that could be 5 or 6. Right. And I think that he's the primary candidate to make big plays against the Giants. But it's definitely a risky play. But I think any of these guys are super risky. And there's the upside for him to have 1 or 2 touchdowns against the Giants if they do end up having a big passing game, which is probably pretty unlikely. But he could get rushing stuff too. He can score in a variety of ways, and this is just a defense where you can kind of run it up on him. McMillan. Okay, so let's try to talk about some guys maybe who people have made it to this point with, which is less likely with Marvin Harrison Jr. So like, what about McMillan or like Adam Thielen or McMillan or Darnell Mooney?
I think I'm going Thielen. I think I'm going McMillan over Mooney though. Okay,
so I've got both those guys ahead of him. What about McMillan or I don't think any of those guys would be in the same conversation. Keenan Allen?
McMillan.
I've got Keenan Allen
very high on McMillan.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. They've got him this game environment is awesome.
Yeah.
And the volume, it's not like totally random. It's not.
Shepard might be out for this one too.
It's not quite like Quentin Johnston at the beginning of the year, but it's kind of like that.
Right.
He's seeing a little bit more volume, I think. And the offense is expected to score more points because their defense is not playing nearly as well as the Chargers was. But it is kind of random where so much was coming from touchdowns. What about DJ Moore? Did you say anything about him? Like you are kind of out on Chicago altogether. Would you rather have McMillan over him?
You kind of talked me into DJ Moore, and I just figured out some weird quirk where my camera was mirroring for some reason after the restart. But you kind of talked me into DJ Moore, I should say, actually, just based on what the usage is. Want to think that there could be more pass attempts, better game script. I think I go Moore.
Jacoby Myers? That's the last guy I've got.
I go McMillan. I'm not a Myers guy.
That's fair. These last couple weeks have been rough.
It's all Bowers all the time.
Yeah. Probably moving him down. All right. I think that's it. I think we did a pretty good job covering a lot of stuff here.
Despite the technical difficulties. I don't know what you did during that period, but I appreciate you.
28 seconds and we'll keep it under an hour.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Support the show. Hit the like button. Please send a comment. Do everything you can. Tell people about the show. Like, support, comment. Have a great day and a great night. But I have not yet gotten to the point where I can finish the show until I get to the StreamYard.